Hello. If Dwight can have an Eren cosmetic, then so can I. Which is very on topic for today, with the new update feeling, well, very Eren. Today we're looking at the mid-chapter 6.1.0 update. Dead by Daylight had become stale. The meta was very much survivors relying on Dead Hard to artificially extend chases. This left many killers to lean towards lots of slowdown perks for generator speed, and increasingly playing Nurse and Blight rather than M1 killers. So behaviour have opted to mix things up. As a quick rundown of the update, Dead Hard is now a 0.5 second dab, Decisive Strike is more of a poke, Iron Will is somewhat pointless, gens take 10 more seconds when on your own, killers are harder, better, faster and stronger, kicking gens instantly regresses them 2.5%, and some other changes to perks here and there. So today we're going to be talking about the solo queue experience, and whether or not the update is a good thing for it along with general balance of the game. To do this, we're going to look at balance in games, the balance of Dead by Daylight, user experience, fairness, and the future of solo queue and what this update potentially means for the game over the next few months. I do want to state that this update is still in its infancy. We're still recalibrating to the new meta, it's very early days, but I think I have enough information to discuss it now. I speak on this topic from the perspective of someone who plays 50-50 between solo queue and killer, and I'll do my best to be as objective as possible. Also, I want to say, liking this update is valid, as is disliking it. So with that, let's discuss. We'll start by talking about balance in games in a more general sense. To balance a game, you should first consider symmetrical design because symmetry greatly simplifies a problem, making it easier to understand and analyse. I did a video on the topic of fairness in DBD in the past where we discussed this topic in more detail, but to summarise it, symmetry leads to an easier time balancing a game. In a symmetric game, every player is identical with respect to the game rules. Obviously Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical game, so balance can be very difficult. True balance within a game world would be the result of every player having the same abilities and opportunities in a match. This idea also extends to level design as well. A good example of this is League of Legends, a MOBA style game where over time the map has gone through many iterations to come to this final version. What makes the design so good is that both sides' objectives and jungle zones are the same, mirror images of one another, along with providing interesting choke points and arenas for combat. The only varying factors are the chosen champions in the match, and the player's skills with them. This ensures that the game is fair and leans towards skill level rather than random factors. This differs from DBD, in the sense that map tiles and objective placements are randomised, limiting its ability to be symmetrical for both sides. The random generation also means ultimately, sometimes maps can favour one side over the other unfairly. Games also employ matchmaking ratings to encourage fairness among matched up players. For example, there is no point new players facing against long-term veterans of the game. You want to face opponents of a similar skill level, else again it can feel quite unfair. The reason this is so important is, fairness or equality is an essential component of games. That's why despite some people's dismay for MMR, its implementation is a good idea. Aside from some teething issues, games generally have become more balanced in terms of player skill in Dead by Daylight. This feeling of balance and fairness should be the focus of any competitive game's design, and DBD is a game which will always struggle to achieve it. So what is the balance in DBD like? Dead by Daylight features two opposing sides, killers and survivors. Ultimately, DBD is a time management game. Killers want to end chases with survivors as quickly as possible and move on to their next potential victim. Survivors want to extend the chases, allowing their teammates ample time to work on generators or get the doors open. The longer the game takes, the larger the advantage for the killer. Both sides have opposing goals and different tools to complete those goals, which immediately makes the balance difficult. The biggest controversy of asymmetric game is whether it can achieve the fairness of the opposing sides under the initial unbalanced setting conditions. It's an uphill battle balancing an asymmetrical game, and I personally cannot think of a game more asymmetrical than DBD. As mentioned prior, DBD also features random generation for the maps, making balance even more difficult. Despite this though, the game is pretty good in terms of both sides having the ability to win, unless the killer is a good nurse, or the survivors are a SWAT team survive with friends, in which case the advantage does tend to sway heavily towards one side or the other. Even though there is randomised factors, the maps do feel mostly fair. There is enough static elements like the killer shack, main building, and similarities between loop tiles that help with this feeling. Generally speaking, I think it's fair to say historically the survivors have been the stronger side. Dead Hard, among other second chance perks, have allowed an average survivor to outplay and waste even an experienced killer's time. As a result, the meta definitely needed updating. Dead Hard was stale, and playing killer was sometimes very deflating as a result. Leaked data suggested a large disparity in survivor to killer players, possibly further supporting that one side had the advantage as fewer players opted to play killer. People generally like to win, and often will opt to play the stronger builds and or team. The recent update has shifted the time balance in the killer's favour. Those initial chases at the beginning of a game that once meant 2 to 3 gens popping, now often mean 0 to 1 gens, at least in my recent experience. Those 10 extra seconds often allow a killer to interrupt using strong perks like Call of Brine and Overcharge. Killer meta hasn't really changed from the gen slowdown as far as I can tell though. In solo queue, that effectively means your gen is going to regress heavily. This, along with a shift in the gen slowdown meta moving towards thanatophobia etc, we're looking at gens sometimes taking an excess of 110 seconds. So killers are far less pressured by generators. With Dead Hard effectively being nullified, Decisive Strike being nerfed into irrelevancy, and all-round killer buffs making them more effective in chases, the time balance is heavily in killer's favour now. This isn't by any means the end of the world, but I do believe the greatest victim here is the casual solo queue player. So let's discuss why it feels worse to play solo queue now. Good design, when it's done well, becomes invisible. It's only when it's done poorly that we notice it. People complaining in the DBD community is nothing new. There's always something wrong. We're a very whiny player base sometimes. Killers are mostly rejoicing at this update. As we mentioned prior, people like to win, and winning has never been easier as killer. Many on Twitter etc think survivors just want Dead Hard back, and maybe some do, but I suspect there is more to it. There is a reason many survivors aren't happy with this change. User experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. Basically, it's the feeling we have when interacting with software, a website, or a brand. As someone who plays both sides fairly equally, I think I'm in a good place to evaluate the issue. Maybe. Either way, I'm going to try to discuss the solo queue survivor user experience, so strap in! In my opinion, there are 4 main things that make up the solo queue survivor experience: repairing generators, looping the killer, the chance of survival, and your random teammates. Let's start with generators. Matches themselves feel longer, likely because the time balance is now in the killer's favour. The longer the match, the better for them. This is going to sound condescending, but many people don't seem to grasp. 90 seconds is significantly longer than 80 seconds. That's a 12.5% increase, and it's very noticeable when playing DBD. As a result, when chased off of that very same generator just to see it kicked and regress before you pray your teammates haven't wasted the nearby pallets, it can feel very deflating. Generally speaking, repairing gens feels the same, except longer and worse if you get chased off, so a negative change nevertheless, harming the player's experience. To be clear, I'm not even saying the change is an overall bad thing, but undoubtedly feels worse for survivors. Looping feels mostly the same as well, but we know the buff is there. Killers have had their action sped up by 10%, so they recover from successful hits, kick generators, and break pallets faster. The simplest way to put this is, they are 10% more effective in some instances of a chase. These small split seconds in a time-based game will add up. In a world where second chance perks have been gutted, it feels like those multiple gen chases may be fairly rare in solo queue. A fruitless chase and loop is also quite deflating for survivors. It's not a bad user experience, but it is a worse user experience. Then there is the chance of survival. Always will and always has been a bit of a coin toss in solo queue. But unfortunately, with a big buff to killers and no improvements to the solo queue playstyle, chance of survival has dropped. Solo queue can be frustrating and chaotic, but the serotonin of the occasional survival makes it worth it. It again is a net negative. You're less likely to experience a win in solo queue now. Or at least this is how it feels to many players. Finally, there is my favourite part of solo queue. The largest uncertainty factor of them all. Your teammates. Solo queue has always had ups and downs. You're gonna get bad teammates. I personally love it when I see them crouching in a corner. Getting mad at them is funny to me. Them being useless is pure joy. Mostly. But now, you can't always afford to have a teammate do nothing as the time balance is more heavily against you. These teammates are now more annoying than ever, and that's if they haven't already disconnected or given up in the first few minutes of a match, which at the moment a lot of them are. People like to, at least occasionally, win, and solo queue doesn't leave much hope for that feeling anymore. And I say this as someone who is still mostly surviving in their games, but I can understand why many feel worse about their chances. So what I'm saying is this update has made all elements of solo queue feel worse. Generators feel slower, looping feels less rewarding, your chance of survival is lower, and having bad teammates is now more annoying. It was arguably already the most difficult way to play Dead by Daylight before now, and it's even more so since the update. I am still enjoying much of my solo queue experience, but I can understand why many are having a worse time. Okay, but has the game at least become more fair? Here's that particularly important quote again. Fairness or equality is an essential component of games. If the game doesn't feel fair, the game has failed. Now, as previously discussed, DBD is never going to be balanced. It's never going to be truly fair. But I think that's fine. It's a party game, so long as we aspire for the game to feel fair at least. So what do I mean? Let's use old Dead Hard as an example. Dead Hard gave you protective iframes making you invincible for a time, whilst you also dashed forward giving you distance. This became a powerful second chance perk for survivors to get you to another loop, even if the killer had outplayed you. This ability to discount a killer's good play felt unfair from the killer's perspective because there was nothing they could do. Likewise, old Decisive Striker Endgame. If unhooked, a survivor that had DS was going to hit a skill check, stun the killer, and always escape. It leaves the killer feeling powerless, and that doesn't feel fair. Both of these perks have been readjusted to resolve this feeling, which is a good thing. This update has done a lot of good for fairness. Killers are happier now because it's fairer for them. Survivors do not suffer this same powerless feeling against most killers. I would say the only time the game feels unfair for Survivor is when being tunneled, camped, or when you're up against a nurse. So overall, I do think this has been a step forward for overall fairness. Camping, tunneling and nurse players are the same as before, but generators are popping much slower. Even as killer, some of my games have lost that competitive feel, as I more frequently have either a great match or I stomp. MMR is likely still recalibrating, so we'll see how things go with this, but as it stands, I can feel the power swing into the killer's side quite significantly. The big issue I have though is that solo queue Survivor feels less fair. That powerless feeling has been amplified in solo queue. I believe this has always been an issue, but this update has really highlighted it. A solo survivor doesn't have communications open with their teammates, or an ability to ping their generator that Overcharge and Call of Brine is currently dismantling its progress. If they want to win, they have to hope their teammates don't give up or wander around not doing generators. Matchmaking seems very sporadic with the caliber of teammates you're matched with at the moment, so it all feels almost random, which further damages this feeling of fairness. So what's next? What do I think is going to be the result of this update? Survivors are going to adapt over time. We'll probably see more Prove Thyself, Repressed Alliance and other gen-focused perks. The meta will evolve and survivors will adapt as much as they can. We're already seeing a better variety of killers, which is fantastic. M1 killers now have a fighting chance with Dead Hard being nerfed, though still a good number of nurses and blights roaming around too. Tunneling and camping, despite the base kit borrowed time etc, will likely remain the same, and has done as far as I can tell. What I mean is there are still plenty of players doing it. If anything, the game's gen slowdown has only empowered that playstyle, but killers are now free to experiment with other builds, although I imagine we're still going to see mostly gen slowdown. I predict kill rates will skyrocket with this patch, and the number of killer players will increase. Likewise, I believe we'll see a decrease in survivors, especially solo queue players, as the game rewards these players even less now, but I don't think it's going to be overly devastating to overall numbers. There has been many reports online of longer killer queues and shorter survivor queues, as there is clearly a new disparity emerging, but this will likely calm down as people adjust to the new meta. It's still early days of course, maybe matchmaking is bugged or something, maybe things will settle, but I can smell a problem brewing. I really believe behaviour need to focus on improving the solo queue experience next. Some form of in-game communication, maybe a ping system like Fortnite, or some minor information on the HUD like Video Horror Society provides its players. But something is needed. As a final note, the discourse online about this update has been pretty ridiculous. Between some killer players not being able to comprehend the issue, and suggesting it's just people crying over Dead Hard, and survivors acting like solo queue was this perfect game mode prior to the update, it's all pretty funny. I will say this, if you're loving this new update, that's great. That is a good thing, and I hope more players grow to love it as well. But were you out there defending someone else's right to love Dead Hard as it was? Do you at least empathise that how you like this new update? Some players preferred the old version. We're all just a bit whiny, aren't we? Too many players are only concerned with if they're having fun, and no one else matters. If nothing else, that's the mindset that will continue to push away casual players, regardless of a particularly sided update. That's the real problem, and we're all somewhat guilty of it. Anyway, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Let's try to remember the update has lots of good in it too. The UI changes, the Bloodpoint grind reduction, the Attack on Titan cosmetics are awesome and a very exciting crossover, and of course Dead Hard being gutted. We can all rejoice and enjoy something, but I think we should all come together and understand solo queue needs support. I genuinely am worried that casual players will go play something else, and right now I wouldn't blame them. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like button, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you liking the new update? How have your solo queue games been? I hope you have an amazing day either way, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
殺してやる。